Hello again, day 2 here in Daytona at the Rolex 24. Big thanks to all of you who watched the first video that we did yesterday, and no one said not to do another one, so here we are again, trying to try something a little bit different here. Hope you guys have been enjoying the Roar Before the 24 from afar. It's been interesting here, to say the least, and we are actually here on site this time in Daytona. A new background for you all, especially for you, Crotch Belt, and your comments yesterday were noted. Not much I can do about the hotel backdrop, but a little bit different here. This is one of the recording rooms that's available to us in the Media Center at the Daytona International Speedway. A little bit different this year than in years past in terms of the access. There are several others of these, but right now this is the only one that's open, but happy we can make use of it here today, and thought we'd have plenty of things to talk about. A big thanks to those of you who submitted questions, and we'll get to those in just a moment. But also, before we get started with the topics of the day, I'd like to issue a quick thank you and also a mea culpa. But first, the thank you to Kyle Busch _ fan 18, who correctly pointed out on Twitter shortly after I released the video yesterday that I misspoke and said that Allegra Motorsports was in a Porsche, when in fact they are running Mercedes equipment here this year. And I think it's a case of old habits dying hard. It's a brand, the Allegra team, that's been so associated with Porsche that it just came out, even though I was rattling off a Mercedes factory driver at one point when talking about the lineup. So apologies for that, and thanks for pointing that out. We're one video in and already one retraction and one correction that we have to make, so bear with me. We're doing our best here with the new format. So let's get into what happened today. We had an on-track session this morning. Then we have the qualifying session for the qualifying race that will be held tomorrow for the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. That, of course, the Motul Pole Award 100. So qualifying to go qualifying here today, and a little bit later, in fact, about 17 minutes from now, night practice will be happening. But wanted to get this out before it got too late tonight, so we're going to go ahead and record now. Some takeaways from today, and really from the weekend as a whole, as far as this first one is concerned. Cadillac looks incredibly strong, and this should not come as a surprise. They have won every single Rolex 24 since the DPI platform came online. Well, what is it, 5 years ago now, I guess. It was my first Rolex 24. This is my 5th, so you do the math. It's been Cadillac domination ever since, primarily Action Express at the top, and Felipe Nasser was fastest in the Roar qualifying session, as I guess it's being called, and he, or at least his number 31 Whelen Engineering Cadillac, will lead the field to green in the Motul Pole Award 100 tomorrow. But you also have to say JDC Miller, pretty impressive. They were fastest in session 3. Prior to that, actually, because it was Tristan Vautier who set that time. He set it pretty late in the session. And before that, it was Renger van der Zande for Chip Ganassi Racing that was at the top for much of that session, and that's another Cadillac team, but impressive because they really haven't got much experience running that car. But Action Express, like we talked about, has been fast. JDC with the one really solid outing, and Chip Ganassi Racing right there. So Cadillac definitely appears to be the package to have, at least over a single lap, and we'll see what happens when we get to the race itself. Also of note, BMW coming out of nowhere, frankly, to take the top 2 spots in GTLM in the Roar qualifying session. They had not really factored in towards the top of the charts if you look at the practice times, I guess, from the Roar here so far, but very strong in that qualifying, led by Marco Wittmann to put that car up in the first spot in class, and then Timo Glock, pretty fun to say his name covering a race. XF1 driver, ex-DTM driver, was second fastest for BMW Team RLL, so curious to see if they can keep that pace under them for the full 100 minutes of the qualifying race tomorrow. And then I think the big storyline all weekend long, we touched on it a little bit on the show yesterday, LMP3 and how it's going to fit in the class structure. And to this point, everyone we talked to has been pretty careful in terms of how to express themselves and any concerns they might have, but I think under the surface, and I will say I've heard a few anecdotes that I can't reveal the names, or I really can't speak about it publicly because it wasn't told to me in that way, but behind the scenes there is some real concern, and I think illustrative of this is the fact that only one of the LMP3 cars qualified ahead of the entire GTLM field. The rest are all sprinkled in there. Now, they are all clear at least of the GTD field, so that's good. Although I do expect there to be some overlap there too. But what this means is because the race will start with class splits, LMP3 is going to start ahead of GTLM. And depending on who starts these P3 cars, there's a very real chance of the GTLMs and possibly some of the front-running GTDs being faster. And especially at the start when it's all really constricted, I think that's going to make for some fraught moments. And it has all of us a little bit concerned, not just for this qualifying race, but more importantly for the Rolex 24 itself. We did have a couple of questions that came in, and one came in from @TreadheadEd on Twitter, who wanted to know if there are any rumblings of a BOP change coming before next weekend. And to answer that, I would say not specifically, but I think we all expect there will be something. And there's a few reasons to think this. Number one, it's pretty normal. We typically do see a change, usually not a big one, but some kind of change between the roar and the race. I guess the caveat this year being there's not as much time in between the two. In years past, there have been several weeks, not so much here this time. But that said, I think the reason we can really expect something is the fact that we even have this qualifying race in the first place. Let's be honest, as much as it was to provide some entertainment value on Roar Weekend and make it seem a bit more serious, I believe, and I think the consensus is the main reason that this qualifying race exists is to get balance and performance data on these cars so that we can have a good, equitable fight in the Rolex 24. That's the idea. And keep in mind, there are points on the line. It's not just starting position from this qualifying race. It's new this year how these points are being paid out for qualifying. And again, season long, that's part of the initiative, I believe, to get more data for the balance of performance. But it starts here with this qualifying race, and with Daytona being so unique, it has a special BOP table that does not apply to the rest of the season. The track itself just doesn't have a lot of similarities to other tracks that we go to. So with that in mind, this is the crucial time then to try and get this information. And with 35 points on the line for the pole, 10% of what it's going to pay to win a race this year, by the way, 350 points, the new point structure for 2021 for a race win, 35 points for a pole, and then you pay points all the way down to, I think it's 30th position, not just in the race, but in qualifying as well, if we were to ever have 30 cars in a class, which we obviously do not this weekend, but there is that contingency there. So all of this to say, there is a big push for a good balance of performance. The way they're going to do it is to try and incentivize this race so they can get some real data, and not just single lap data either, like you would get from a qualifying session, but rather a couple of full stints basically with this 100-minute race, and hopefully that can help the governing body make some tweaks to make sure we have a good race come next weekend. So that's a really good question, Treadhead Ed, and I hope it helps answer that question. I got another one coming in from Spoon Quinnell, I think is how it's pronounced. That's his handle on Twitter. It's Sven is the name in front of that, and I believe I saw on your handle there, Sven, that you're from Bruges in Belgium, one of my favorite places. So thank you so much for watching. Happy to have you along for the ride. He wants to know how Ben Keating, driving 2 different cars in 2 different classes once again, manages to do it with all the sleeping and eating and driving and sleeping and various things that go into that. And number one, I would say he's got practice. He's done this quite a few times. He did it last year. Ben, by the way, put the LMP2 car that he's racing in on pole, I guess, even though it doesn't count as a pole, but pole for the qualifying race, which will set the real pole for the race. So that's a back-to-back pole qualifying result, if you can call it that, for Ben Keating, even though this one doesn't exactly count for the history books, but he was on pole last year, you may recall, at LMP2. So all the practice there that he's done this so many times, he's got a pretty good system for how to do it, and he'll talk openly about how important it is to have the cooperation between the two teams, because remember, there is minimum drive time to keep in mind that has to be met in both classes. There are no exceptions for him because that applies to those 2 entries independent of one another. So it is difficult. It is going to take some serious cooperation between the two, but they've worked it out, And I'm really curious to see how he does, because he was excellent last year. That opening stint here at the Rolex 24 a year ago in the P2 car, where he basically lapped the field, it was something else. He has earned his reputation as one of the fastest, if not the fastest, bronze-rated driver on the planet, and I think we'll see that on full display once again. So, what do we have coming up? Night practice is about to start, so looking forward to that. You can check out some of my written coverage of that up at sportscar365.com. We've had a whole lot going on there throughout the day. A really interesting story, by the way, and I encourage you to check this out. I found this to be fascinating. The crew that is running the number 48 car, that's the Jimmy Johnson and All-Star car for Action Express Racing, their one-off. I talked to Gary Nelson, who is the team manager for Action Express, and he said that they had a hard time finding crew to staff that car, to go over the wall. And what they ended up doing was pitching NASCAR teams and saying, let us borrow your guys. They're full-time employees on the NASCAR side. Let us borrow them, send them over the wall, and get them experience with the single lug nut and the aluminum wheels that NASCAR is going to be using in its next-gen car starting next season in 2022. And they were able to find an arrangement specifically with Hendrick Motorsports, and it comes as no surprise that Chad Knaus is here, embedded with that team, the Action Express team, and I suspect that that relationship had something to do with it. But it's interesting, that crossover now that's seeming to grow between NASCAR and IMSA. We know that the business connection is there, but now there's that competition element, especially with the changes for the next-gen car, and also especially when you consider how many road courses are going to be on the schedule next year in Cup. I think it's 7 or 8 if you include the Clash. So really, really interesting. I found that fascinating, and there are a couple of NASCAR crew guys that are going to have a leg up on the competition thanks to this experience here at the Roar. And at the Rolex 24 for that matter. So check out that story and the rest of our work up there, and you can also find me on Twitter for updates, also Instagram at Ryan Marine. You can see the spelling down below. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I trust you'll be able to find it. And we look forward to doing this again. I think the plan is to do one more video this week, tomorrow, possibly one more on Monday at the very most. We'll kind of take a wait-and-see approach, and would love to hear from you as well. Send questions in to that Twitter handle. Leave them in the comments section below. You can also send them in on Instagram. We'll be looking for that too. Hope you've enjoyed this. We'd love your feedback on it as well if anything comes to mind, and we'll do our best to get you the content you're looking for as you follow the start of the IMSA season from wherever in the world you might be. Thanks for joining me here from Daytona.